Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has overseen the launch of a new hypersonic nuclear missile, which he hailed as an excellent New Year's gift to the nation. The Kremlin claims the avant-garde missile successfully hit its target that was 6,000 kilometres away, and it can fly at 20 times the speed of sound. The test comes amid bitter tensions between Russia and the US. Those relations have sunk to their lowest level since the Cold War. Well, we're going to delve into this a little bit more by looking at how the press around the world is talking about it. So joining me in our studio to do that are our reporters Damon Embling and Sergei Dubin, who is the head of our Russian service. So let's start with you, Sergei, because this is, where you're going to tell us where the story is all happening. We might imagine the Russian press would be well, let's say enthusiastic about this. Is that the case?
Yes, absolutely, because most of the large circulation press, printed press, is to say the least loyal to Kremlin. The few newspapers that can be seen as pretty objective, like Vedomosti, let's say, they just relate official figures. Actually, it's more or less that everybody can go to the official figures, the stuff that the Ministry of Defense has been giving to the press and to the participants in the meeting where the President Putin overseen the launch. And as you've said, yeah, it's 20 times max speed. The temperature is 1,600, 2,000 degrees, the temperature of the missile itself. Some of the newspapers are really gushing, like ecstatic, like Komsomolskaya Pravda, which is like a more or less tabloid broadsheet publication, and they really sarcastically say, oh, when Putin announced it on the 1st of March, they were saying, oh, it's just cartoons, but now we see this is really some real truth behind it.
Now, we only have the Russian version or sort of account to say how fast this missile is and how strong it is. What is the European and the Western press essentially saying?
On the face of it, this all sounds quite scary, doesn't it, Bal, that they're developing this weapons system that could strike any country in an instant. And I think the European and Western media, the American media, are watching this very closely because, as you were saying before, relations between Europe, the US and Russia have plunged to this all-time low right now. So they're wondering what's going to happen next. And I think we've got a case at the moment of Donald Trump in America and Vladimir Putin in Russia sort of flexing their muscles and saying, who's the strongest and the mightiest, who has the biggest weapon. So there's a war of words going on around this. One UK newspaper I've been looking at this morning, The Independent, their headline is saying Vladimir Putin heralds successful tests of new hypersonic nuclear weapons. But what's actually quite interesting in that article later on, when we talk about this independent verification, actually the real power of this nuclear system, it cites one expert that they spoke to earlier this year when Vladimir Putin unveiled this whole list of weapons in March earlier this year. And this expert was actually saying, and they quote again, that list amounted no more than a horror story. And that expert was saying that actually finance and technology stand in the way of Vladimir Putin and Russia developing these weapons. So, do you think it's a little bit just words and it won't go any further?
Well, still, anyway, now after the cartoons, as it was said back in March, now we've seen the real deal, and it's at least something that could be verified or touched by happy few. Well, interesting that the Russian press, and you mentioned that both countries are flexing their muscle, because the Russian press, quoting the official or the experts, say it's advancing what the Americans have for 5 or 6 years, because their Project Falcon can just follow a normal trajectory and it's easier to shut it down. And it's slower than our avant-garde 4 times. So it's really who has the biggest weapon.
And this is escalating this arms race. Yeah. What I'm interested about is that Vladimir Putin has essentially continued to remain in power on a ticket of saying we are at war with the West, whether we like to think of it or not. Russia is at war with the West, and I'm the only man who can protect you from the West.
But still, Putin is very careful to emphasize we did not the ones who started it. They've moved their anti-missile system to our border. We have only just doing this, or this is the United States States who left the nuclear treaty. We're just responding to it. We have to protect ourselves.
But of course, Donald Trump is saying this is an arms race, and Europe is saying that there's a perceived Russian aggression going on right now. So you do have this difficult situation with tensions building between America, Europe and Russia. And actually, Donald Trump is actually making his efforts to tackle Russia and China, for that matter, a big part of his defence strategy. Actually been moving parts of the military apparatus to kind of tackle this. Big priority for him right now.
For both of you, how realistic do you think the possibility is that this, what we're seeing now, this Cold War, these words, could escalate into something more real?
Well, let's hope, and he's hoping is just for sure. The risk could be too great for all parties involved, I guess.
I think both sides, there's a lot of tough talking going on here, and we have to kind of try and sometimes cut through that. But obviously, everybody wants to try and avert the risk of a war happening. I mean, one of the tabloids in the UK today is saying Vlad's rocket, Russia successfully launches this avant-garde missile, ready for war in 2019. Quite a provocative headline there, but let's hope that these tensions don't go any further, I think.
There have been demonstrations in Tunisia after a man was set alight, all part of his effort to highlight the country's economic problems. Our Cube team, led by Cindy, has been taking a look into this, haven't you?
We have, Belle. And remember, this is the country where the Arab Spring protests began. And now we're seeing numerous protests on the street, including this one. Protests that have been posted on social media. We'll take a look here. People can be seen lighting things afire. This has been taking place all throughout this week. There have been numerous clashes and numerous people who have been arrested, and they are revolting against the poverty in the country. And this all started after a journalist said that he was going to light himself on fire. He posted a video that I'll bring up here where he talked about how he had been trying to find a good job for the last 8 years without any luck. In this video, you can actually see him holding a bottle of gasoline. He says he's going to light himself on fire, and he's calling on the unemployed to take to the streets to revolt. We later see in another video that he is lit on fire and he ended up dying. It's unclear whether he lit that match himself or if someone else did. But what we have seen are these mass protests in Tunisia as a result. And some people say that this is actually reminiscent of what we saw in 2010. Remember this man, the Tunisian street vendor, who set himself on fire to protest against police harassment. And that led to revolts not only in his country, but of course, all throughout the Middle East. Well, in the 8 years since that happened, in the 8 years since the Arab Spring began, this journalist says that nothing has changed in his country, and in his words, that everything is lies. And that is why he has called his fellow Tunisians to take to the streets to revolt against the economic conditions in his country.
International aid agencies are battling difficult conditions in Indonesia. One of those agencies is the Red Cross, and Rosemary North works for them. She joins me now from the devastated Banten province on Java Island. Ms. North, when we spoke yesterday, we talked about the chances of finding survivors. What are those chances now, a further 24 hours later?
With every day, the chance of finding survivors, diminishes, but we still have hope that a miracle might happen. The focus for the Red Cross now, though, is on delivering food, water, tarpaulins and blankets to those people who are displaced away from the coastline, and today's news won't make it easier for them to think about going home.
And some of those areas that you're talking about are very remote. How are agencies like yours working to reach those people and get them the supplies that they need?
Fortunately, the Indonesian Red Cross does have branches all over this coastline. They know those roads. They know how to get into those back areas.
We've got a state of emergency in Indonesia. It's in place until the 4th of January. Do you think that's enough time to get the situation under control?
We really hope nature plays along. We would like Krakatau to settle down. We'd like the high tides to go down. We'd like a respite in the rain. And then let's see how we are.
And what about the people that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Those who have been evacuated from islands near the volcanoes, those who've lost family, lost their homes. How are they doing, and what do they need the most?
Yeah, I visited a mosque today where about 300 people are staying every night. They told me that they go back to their homes during the day to do washing and cooking. Most of their homes are not damaged, but they're far too nervous to go back and stay the night there. It'll be a long time before they feel confident enough to resume their daily lives. At the same time, though, many of them have lost their livelihoods. They ran small shops or they worked in hotels. They really need things to go back to normal as soon as they can.
And realistically, we're looking at a country that has suffered natural disaster upon natural disaster over the last year. With that in mind, how long is it going to be, do you think, before Indonesia can regain some form of normality? And what needs to happen in order for that to take place?
Well, I actually wonder if a succession of disasters is the new normal in Indonesia, and perhaps it always has been. So what's different is people's ability to prepare for that, to have disaster-resistant infrastructure and housing, to know what to do when there is a disaster, and to be able to respond quickly and effectively when it does strike.